I woke up last night in a panic. I couldn't tell you why. I didn't hear a sound. No dream I remembered, no thunder or siren. But my eyes snapped open like I'd been called. It was 3:12 a.m., the kind of hour when the house is dead quiet and your thoughts feel like they're shouting. At first, I didn't move. I just lay there listening to the hum of the fridge. Through the walls, the slight ticking of the hallway clock, the soft creak of wood settling in my old rental house. Nothing unusual. But I had that feeling again, the one I used to get every night for years, the one I tried to forget. Like something was missing, or watching. I sat up slowly, instinctively reaching to turn on the lamp beside my bed. And that's when I saw it. A small rectangle lying perfectly centered on my pillow. Not beneath it, not by my head, not wedged in the sheets, just sitting there. My heart kicked up into my throat, my breath caught. I leaned in. It was old, faded but unmistakable. Tia's school ID, the one she was carrying the day she disappeared. It had the same worn-out photo, her half-smile, the little gold necklace she never took off, her hair pulled into that tight bun I always begged her to loosen. Her name printed in block letters, Tia Linden, 10th grade. Except there was something wrong, something impossible. The expiry date wasn't 2006. It said, expires 07/30/2025. I froze. I just stared at it, blinking, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Tia disappeared in April 2006, nearly 19 years ago. That ID, that photo, it belonged in the past, buried in some evidence locker or wherever the police dumped the files they gave up on. And yet it was sitting on my pillow, in my locked house, with an expiry date almost a year from now. I didn't scream. I didn't even move at first. I just felt cold all over. My fingers started shaking, my lips too. The only thing I could manage to whisper was her name, Tia. I hadn't said it out loud in weeks, maybe months. I picked up the ID, carefully, like it might crumble in my hands or vanish the second I touched it. I held it under the lamplight. The photo looked newer, sharper, not like it had aged. It didn't look like a faded artifact, it looked printed recently. But it was her. Same eyes, same smile, same little scar on her cheek from when she fell off her bike in 2nd grade. Except the girl in the photo, she looked older. Not 15, more like 30. The face was the same but more defined, more hollow around the cheeks, a few faint lines near the eyes. It was Tia, but it was also someone she never got to become, at least not in my world. I pressed the ID to my chest and stared at the window across the room. It was slightly cracked open. I was sure I'd shut it before bed. I always...
Floors, no muddy prints, no signs of intrusion. Nothing had been taken, nothing had been disturbed, except my heart, except that ID. You need to understand something. I buried my daughter in every way but one. There was no body, no official answer, no justice. But I tried to bury her in my mind. For survival. You can't carry that grief around every day and still function. You'd go mad. I had to teach myself not to expect her footsteps, not to hear her voice when I turned the key in the door. I did what mothers do when there's no grave to cry over. I learned to cry in silence. But last night, when I held that plastic rectangle in my hands, every locked door inside me flew open again. All those years of wondering, did she run away? Was she taken? Is she alive? Does she even remember me? And now this clue, this message maybe. Because that ID didn't get here on its own. Someone placed it, which means someone had it. And if someone had it, maybe, just maybe, she's still alive. Stay with this video, because what this mother uncovers next will leave you stunned. And the truth, it was hidden in plain sight all along. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Before 2006, my life was small, quiet, and steady.
I wasn't wealthy or wildly successful, but I had what I believed mattered most: peace, routine, and my daughter. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom rental on a tree-lined street in Boise, Idaho. The kind of neighborhood where neighbors still waved lawnmowers started on Saturdays and wind chimes clinked gently in the breeze. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. Or so I thought. My daughter Taya was 15 at the time, my only child. She wasn't the loud, bubbly type of teenager. Taya was thoughtful, always a little serious, always scribbling something in her notebooks, poems, journal entries, drawings. I used to tease her about how she carried that notebook everywhere, even to the dinner table. She'd just smile and say, "I'm writing life down before I forget it." She loved thunderstorms and hated bright lights. She'd never eat the crust on toast, but could devour 3 pancakes in 2 minutes flat. She was smart, not just academically, but deeply perceptive. She could sense tension before words were spoken. I always felt she had an old soul, far older than her 15 years. We were close, not just as mother and daughter, but almost like quiet companions. We watched the same old mystery movies every Friday night, shared the same tea mug in the mornings, and kept a small notebook where we wrote letters to each other. When we were too tired to talk, we'd just write in the notebook and leave it on the other's pillow. I still have that notebook. It's in a locked box under my bed. The last letter she wrote me is still marked with a little heart next to my name. "Dear Mom, thank you for loving me even when I'm weird. You're my favorite person on earth." That was March 30th, 2006, 4 days before she vanished. Back then, I worked at the local library, was the circulation manager, in charge of the returns, shelving, and monthly book club. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. I loved the quiet, the smell of old pages, the way regulars came in just to talk. I'd be home by 4 p.m. most days, just in time to start dinner. Taya would come home from school at 3:30. She'd sit at the kitchen table, with her bag still on, going on about some girl drama I barely understood, or the book she was reading that week. I'd listen while chopping onions or stirring the pot. It was simple, ordinary, but I felt full, fulfilled. We didn't have much family. My own parents had passed away long before, and Taya's father, well, he left when she was 2. He didn't come around after that. No birthday cards, no visits. Taya asked about him a few times when she was little, but eventually she stopped. I think she knew she didn't need a father to be whole. She had me, and I had her. On weekends, we'd walk to the bookstore downtown and then go get chocolate milkshakes afterward. It was our ritual. She'd always order the same thing, double chocolate, with whipped cream and cinnamon on top. She had dreams, too. She wanted to be a writer, or a child psychologist, or both. She once told me, "If I can help just one person feel less alone, I'll be happy." Taya wasn't the kind of kid who rebelled. She didn't sneak out, didn't yell, didn't roll her eyes. But I did start to notice in late March that she was getting quieter. I chalked it up to teenage hormones, high school stress. We had no enemies, no threats, no serious problems. So I believed things would even out, that she'd talk when she was ready, that love, consistency, and a stable home were enough to protect a child from the world. But I was wrong. Looking back now, I see the signs, the fatigue behind her eyes, the nights she couldn't sleep, the way she stopped writing in our notebook, little things, things you ignore because you're afraid of what they might mean. There's this illusion we carry as mothers, that we'll know the moment something bad is coming, that we'll feel it in our bones. But the truth is, danger doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes we're too in love with our lives to hear it. The last weekend before she disappeared, we went to a used book sale. She picked out a poetry collection, Rilke, I think, and we sat on a bench in the park reading under the sun. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I remember thinking, she's growing up, but she's still my baby. I thought we had more time. That night, I made her favorite dinner, honey, garlic chicken, and roasted sweet potatoes. We watched To Kill a Mockingbird again, her favorite. She fell asleep halfway through. I tucked a blanket around her and kissed her forehead. It was the last time I touched her. If I had known what was coming, if I had even felt it, I don't know what I could have done, but I would have done something. I would have held her tighter. Late. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about 2 weeks before Taya vanished. I remember it so clearly because of how ordinary everything felt, and how quickly that changed. I had come home from the library a little early that day. The air outside was warming up, teasing springtime. I stopped by the corner market to pick up ingredients for beef stew. I even picked up a box of her favorite herbal tea. Taya had been feeling off, as she put it, tired, distracted. I thought a warm cup of something and a mother-daughter chat might do her some good. But when she came home from school that afternoon, something was different. She walked in without her usual sing-song, "Hey, Mom," and her backpack slipped from her shoulder like it weighed more than it should. I was in the kitchen slicing carrots, but I glanced up right away. Her steps were heavy, tired. Her whole body language was closed off. I smiled and said, "Hey, baby, rough day?" She didn't look up, just muttered, "Yeah," and headed down the hallway. That was strange. Taya wasn't the kind of kid to brush me off. Even when she was exhausted or cranky, she'd at least offer a half-hearted story or sit at the counter with her notebook while I cooked. This time, nothing. I followed her into her room a few minutes later, trying to act casual. She had kicked off her shoes, sat on the edge of her bed, and was staring down at something in her hands. I couldn't see what it was. I knocked on the doorframe and asked if she wanted some tea. She jumped, actually jumped, and shoved the object under her pillow. "Taya?" I asked gently. She smiled too quickly, like someone flipping on a switch. "Sorry, just tired." "Are you okay?" She nodded. "Yeah, just school's been weird." "Weird how?" She shrugged, then reached for her earbuds, like that would close the conversation. "Just dumb stuff, I'm fine, Mom." I stood there for a second, staring at the pillow where she'd hidden something. I knew that instinct, the one that screams, something is off, something is wrong, but I talked myself out of it. I didn't want to invade her privacy. I didn't want to be the overbearing mom, so I told myself it was probably a letter from a boy or a bad grade she didn't want to show me yet. I let it go. But when she finally came out to eat an hour later, I noticed the tear in her sleeve. Not a little snag. A clean split down the left forearm of her school sweater, like it had been yanked. And right below that, a purple-blue bruise, still fresh, still blooming. I froze. "What happened to your arm?" She looked down like she hadn't even noticed it. "Oh, I bumped into a locker." "You sure? That looks deep. Did someone grab you?" She laughed. Too loud, too fast. "No, Mom. God, I was just being clumsy." That was the moment. Right there. That smile. That too easy answer. It wasn't just a red flag. It was a flare. And yet I did nothing. I nodded. "Okay, just be careful," and stared at nothing for almost an hour. I kept replaying that bruise in my mind, the way she flinched when I spoke, the way she smiled, like it was a performance. Something had shifted. The next morning, I checked her school sweater before washing it. The tear looked like it had been made by a fingernail, ragged, not from a locker. I hesitated. I stood in the laundry room, holding that torn sleeve like it was evidence in a trial I didn't want to admit was happening. But once again, I talked myself down, because that's what parents do when they're scared. They hope, they rationalize, they think maybe it's not what I think it is. That weekend, she didn't ask to go to the bookstore. She stayed in her room most of Saturday, curtains drawn, writing furiously in her notebook. When I offered to take her out for milkshakes, she said, "I'm not in the mood. Taya, not in the mood for chocolate milkshakes." It didn't hit me until later how unlike her that was. But at the time, I nodded and backed away. I figured teenagers go through phases. I told myself she'd talk when she was ready. But sometimes silence isn't waiting. Sometimes it's hiding. And I should have known that. I should have pushed gently but firmly. I should have asked to see what was under her pillow. I should have told her she didn't have to carry anything alone. But I didn't. I let her slip behind that quiet smile, and I didn't realize it then, but that moment, that single bruise, that torn sleeve, that too quick laugh, it was the beginning of the unraveling. The first real warning, the first whisper of the storm, and I turned away. I kept that sweater, still have it. Still smells faintly like lavender and shampoo and something I never got to name. Looking back, the worst part wasn't that my daughter vanished. It was realizing she had already been disappearing long before the day she left. It happened slowly, quietly, like fog rolling in at night. You don't notice it until you can't see the road anymore. That's how it felt with Taya. After the bruise and the torn sweater, things didn't go back to normal. They shifted. Just slightly enough to avoid panic, but deeply enough to leave a permanent crack between us. Taya stopped sitting with me during meals. She'd quietly fill a plate and carry it to her room, claiming she had too much homework. Her bedroom door, which used to always be cracked open, stayed shut now, sometimes locked. She was always tired, always distant. One night I knocked gently and asked if she wanted to re-watch The Secret Garden, one of her old favorites. Her voice came through the door, flat and muffled, not really in the mood. When I asked if something had happened at school, she said, no. When I offered to take her to the bookstore, she said, maybe next weekend. When I told her I missed her, she said, I'm just busy. It was always polite, never rude, but cold, distant, like she had learned how to make space between us without raising suspicion. I remember finding her notebook open on the kitchen table one morning, just for a second. A single page was half written, then crossed out so hard it had torn through the paper. I didn't read it. I told myself not to, but the words burned into my memory. I want to scream, but there's nowhere safe to do it. I didn't confront her. I just closed the notebook and left it where she had placed it, hoping she'd see that I respected her space. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe she didn't need me to respect her boundaries. Maybe she needed me to break through them. Her behavior became harder to explain to others. I'd run into her old teachers at the grocery store. They'd ask how she was doing, and I'd lie, smiling, nodding, pretending everything was fine, but inside I was panicking. She had dropped out of the poetry club, quit the spring drama auditions, stopped going to her after-school volunteer program at the shelter. All the things that used to bring her joy, all the ways she connected to the world, gone. Even her music changed. She used to hum softly while doing chores. We'd dance around the kitchen sometimes when old Motown songs played on the radio. But now, silence. Or worse, the occasional bursts of angry, distorted music leaking through her headphones. I'd knock to ask her to turn it down, and she'd barely nod in acknowledgement, eyes blank behind her bangs. And then came the lies. Small ones at first. She'd say she had no homework, but her report card showed missing assignments. She said she was going to the library, but I'd find out later the school library had closed early that day. She said she was staying after school for tutoring, but she'd come home with dirt on her knees and eyes red from crying. Once I found a receipt from a fast food place 2 towns over, dated during school hours. When I asked her about it, she said it must have been someone else's, that she picked it up by mistake. I wanted to believe her. I needed to. I convinced myself it was just a phase, teenage rebellion, stress, hormones. But what if it wasn't? What if something or someone was pulling her into a place I couldn't follow? There were moments when I caught her staring off into nothing, her fingers twitching slightly, like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Other times she seemed jumpy, like she was listening for footsteps no one else could hear. One night, I heard her sobbing through the wall. I got up, padded softly to her door, and placed my hand on the knob. And I didn't turn it. I stood there, frozen, listening to my child cry herself to sleep. And I did nothing. I told myself it was respect, that she'd opened up when she was ready. But the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of what I'd find if I pushed. Afraid of hearing something I couldn't fix. Afraid that my love wouldn't be enough to pull her back. The final straw, the moment I should have known, came just 3 days before she vanished. I was doing laundry when I found a prepaid cell phone in the pocket of her jeans. Not her usual phone, a cheap burner model I didn't recognize. Taken at night, but I could make out the shape of a man, older, wearing a baseball cap, standing next to a car with no license plate visible. Taya wasn't in the photo, but I felt it in my gut she had taken it. When she came home, I confronted her. She went pale. "I found a phone in your jeans." Her lips parted, her eyes darted to the laundry basket. And then she said calmly, "It's not mine." "It was in your pocket, Taya." She just repeated, "It's not mine." I held the phone out to her. She refused to touch it. Then she turned, walked to her room, and shut the door. That night I didn't sleep. Neither did she. There was a weight in the house. Not loud, not violent, but suffocating, like something was ending and neither of us had the words to stop it. That's what emotional erosion feels like. Not a scream, not a storm, just silence, pulling everything away, grain by grain, until the child you love is standing right in front of you and you can't reach her anymore. It happened on a Thursday, the last Thursday I ever saw her, and it still plays in my head like an endless loop. That morning, Taya had barely said a word. I tried to offer her a ride to school, but she mumbled that she was walking. I knew she hated walking that far, especially with her heavy backpack, but she was gone before I could ask anything more. She didn't even say goodbye. I stood at the door with her uneaten toast still on the plate, feeling that now familiar ache in my chest. The ache of loving someone who's slipping through your fingers in real time. I decided for once to follow my gut. At 2:45, I left work early and drove to the school. I told myself I just wanted to see her, check if she was okay. I wasn't trying to spy. I just needed a glimpse of my daughter being normal, alive, somewhere she was supposed to be. I parked near the student parking lot and waited, pretending to scroll through my phone. Students started trickling out, laughing, shouting, tossing their backpacks, the usual after-school buzz. Then I saw her. Taya stepped out of the side door, hoodie up, walking fast. Too fast. She wasn't heading toward the main gate. She was cutting across the back lot toward the edge of campus. I sat up in my seat, confused. And then I saw him. A car. Older model, dark gray, no front license plate. Rolled slowly to a stop near the alleyway. The passenger door popped open before it even came to a full halt. Taya didn't hesitate. She jogged the last few steps and got in. No hesitation, no glance around, no look over her shoulder, just gone. I didn't even realize it started the engine. My hands were trembling. I followed the car at a distance, just far enough not to be obvious, but close enough to keep it in sight. They stopped at a gas station on the edge of town. The car parked behind the building, out of view of the pumps. Taya and the man, yes, he was a man, at least in his 40s, got out. I stayed in my car, parked across the street, hiding at something, and then grabbed her upper arm, not hard, but firm, controlling. I couldn't hear what was said, but I didn't need to. The body language spoke volumes. Tia's head dropped, shoulders curled in. She nodded. And then, this part still hurts to say, she handed him something from her backpack. It looked like a small envelope or pouch. He tucked it into his coat, smiled. She didn't. He reached to touch her cheek. She flinched. It was all over in less than 5 minutes. They got back in the car, drove off, and I didn't follow. I just sat there frozen, crying silently behind the wheel. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I didn't. There was no joy in her face, no teenage rebellion, no excitement. There was resignation, like she knew her place in that car, like she'd been in it 100 times before. I felt sick. That night, I didn't confront her. I wish I could say I barged into her room, demanded the truth, held her and promised her I'd never let anyone hurt her, but I didn't. I just stood outside her bedroom door, again, listening. No crying this time, no music, no rustling pages, just silence. The next morning, I thought maybe I could reach her, really reach her. If I just tried harder. So I left a note on the table with a bagged lunch. No matter what's going on, you can tell me. I love you more than anything in this world, Mom. The note was gone when I came home from work, but she didn't say anything about it. Later that evening, I walked past the laundry room and saw her sweater, the same one with the tear, crumpled on the floor. I picked it up and saw it again, another bruise, new, fainter, just starting to bloom across her upper arm. I clutched the fabric and sank to the floor. That was my moment, the moment I knew something was really wrong, and still I said nothing. Because I didn't want to push her away. Because I was scared of what I'd learn. Because I thought I had more time. That Sunday she came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes. She stood there for a long moment watching me. I could feel her behind me, but I didn't turn around. I wanted to, God, I wanted to. But I was too afraid I'd say the wrong thing and ruin the moment. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, measured. Do you think people can be trapped without chains? I turned, drying my hands on a towel. What do you mean? But she shook her head and smiled, that same fake smile. Never mind. She walked away. That was the last real conversation we ever had, and I didn't even understand it at the time. But now I do. That wasn't just a question. That was a confession. April 3rd, 2006. I remember everything about that morning, the weather, the way the sunlight stretched across the kitchen tiles, the sound of birds outside the window. It was the first warm day of the season, and though they were fraying at the cuffs. She wasn't wearing her usual school bag. Instead, she had a smaller backpack, one I hadn't seen in years, probably from middle school. That was my first alarm bell. The second was that she looked peaceful, almost too calm, like someone who had made a decision. I said softly, trying to read her face. Morning, she replied, opening the fridge and pulling out an apple. You sure you don't want eggs? I can make them real quick. She shook her head. I'm good. Not hungry. She didn't sit, didn't linger. I wanted to ask her where her school bag was, but something told me not to. I was afraid if I pressed too hard she'd shut down again, or vanish behind that mask she'd been wearing for weeks. She stood there for a moment, biting her lip. She looked like she wanted to say something. Her fingers gripped the strap of her backpack tight. I watched her knuckles go white. Then she forced a smile. I might stay late today. Group project. I nodded. Okay, I'll leave the porch light on. She nodded back, took a step toward the door, then paused. Love you. I looked up from the coffee pot, caught off guard. It had been days since she said that. I love you too, baby. She smiled again, a real one this time. Then she walked out the door. That was the last time I saw my daughter. That night, I wasn't too worried at first. She said she'd be late. I figured the group project ran long and kids lost track of time. Maybe she went for ice cream with a friend? By 7:00 p.m., I texted her. No reply. By 8:30, I called twice. It rang, then went to voicemail. By 9:15, I was pacing. I called the school, then her two closest friends. Neither had seen her since lunch. By 1:00 p.m., I drove the route between our house and the school. I circled the gas station. I checked the park. I checked the library. I even pulled into that alley near the back lot where she's seen her get in that man's car. Nothing. No Taya, no messages, no answers. At 11:34 p.m., I called the police. They told me most teens come back by morning, that maybe she just needed space, that she was 15 and not legally a child who needed to be declared missing until 24 hours had passed. I told them she wasn't the type to disappear. She wasn't running away. They listened. They took my report. But I could see it in their faces, the doubt, the quiet dismissal. Another dramatic moan. Another troubled teen. They didn't understand. Taya didn't vanish out of rebellion. She didn't storm out. There were no slamming doors, no notes, no screaming matches. She left quietly, because by that point she'd already been erased. From her school, from her friends, from herself. The next morning, her phone was found in a ditch, 3 blocks from the house. Screen cracked, battery missing, no fingerprints except hers. A week later, her regular school backpack was discovered behind a dumpster in a strip. Thought the investigation stalled within a month. The police labeled it a probable runaway. The school sent a generic letter out to parents. One of our students has gone missing. Please speak to your children about personal safety. Her photo was stapled to bulletin boards for a few weeks before being taken down. People moved on. Except me, because I knew my daughter hadn't run away. She had been pushed, not with hands maybe, but with silence, with fear, with someone else's control. And by the time she walked out that door, Tia didn't believe anyone would come looking. Not the school, not the system, maybe not even me. That belief that she was truly alone was the most devastating part. Because she wasn't. I was right here. But I never opened the right door. I never asked the hard questions. I never demanded to see what was in her bag, or who was in that car, or why she was so sad when no one was watching. And by the time I realized how far gone she really was, the house was already empty. There's a difference between someone choosing to leave and someone walking away, because the world gave them no place to stay. Tia didn't choose to disappear. She was quietly erased, one ignored bruise at a time. One silent dinner at a time. One missed question at a time. Until the day came when leaving felt safer than staying. And she did. She walked out the front door, took the first step, and never came home. I don't remember the first week after Tia disappeared. Not in detail, just fragments. Broken glass, cold coffee, the buzz of fluorescent lights in police stations. People's mouths moved, but their words sounded underwater. I didn't cry right away. Shock is cruel like that. It doesn't allow tears. It gives you just enough energy to function, to make flyers, call hospitals, argue with detectives, retell the same story 37 times. And then, when everyone else has stopped asking questions, that's when the grief slips in and chokes you slowly. By week 3, the casserole dishes from neighbors had stopped arriving. The flyers on telephone poles were curling in the rain. Her classmates had gone back to worrying about prom and math homework. But I couldn't go back to anything. I stopped going to work. The library let me take a leave, but I never returned. I couldn't walk past a fiction shelf without thinking of the stories she used to love. Every corner of my workplace reminded me of her. The mystery novels she borrowed, the beanbag so hard my throat gave out. I screamed into her sheets like it would bring her back. I fell asleep in her bed that night, woke up cold, twisted in blankets that weren't mine, skin sticky with tears and regret. That became a habit. Some nights I'd sleep in her bed, then my own, then on the couch. I stopped using dishes and started drinking tea straight from the kettle. I didn't bathe every day. Time warped. I wasn't living. I was waiting. Just waiting. Waiting for the knock, the call, the scream, anything. And when none of it came, I unraveled. There was one afternoon, maybe 6 months in, when I stood in the grocery store staring at a shelf of shampoo bottles, completely frozen. I couldn't remember what I came in for. I stood there for 40 minutes. A clerk asked me if I needed help. I said nothing, just left the card and walked out. I stopped answering the phone, I stopped answering the door. Even my sister Dina stopped coming by after a while. She used to check on me every few days, bring groceries, try to get me to eat. But there's only so many times you can watch someone choose grief over life before you have to walk away to protect yourself. One night I lit a candle in the kitchen while boiling water for pasta. I must have walked away and forgotten about it. I woke up hours later on the floor. I'd fainted from exhaustion or dehydration, I don't know. The flame had burned out on its own. But I remember thinking if the house had burned down, at least it would match the inside of me. That thought stayed with me. That's when I knew I was no longer okay. I wasn't just grieving. I was fading. The worst part wasn't the tears or the anger. It was the numbness. Because when pain fades into nothing, that's when you stop being afraid of death. Not because you want to die, but because you don't feel anything anymore, and you forget why it matters. I started collecting things. Not normal things. Clues. I became obsessed. Every unidentified girl on the news, every online thread, every blurred surveillance photo. I printed them all, labeled them, created a wall of speculation in the basement like some cracked detective in a bad movie. I remember the day I pinned up a photo of a girl found in New Mexico. Same height, same hair, same hands. Not Taya. But for 5 hours I convinced myself it was her. I convinced myself she had survived, that she just didn't remember me, that maybe her mind was broken, not her body. And then when the DNA test came back negative, I collapsed. Not on the floor, not in tears. I just sat in the dark for the rest of the night. And for the first time in my life, I thought, what if I died and no one even noticed? That's what rock bottom felt like. Not loud, not dramatic, just invisible. One night, maybe a year after Taya vanished, I sat on the front porch in my old flannel shirt watching the streetlights flicker. The whole world had moved on, dogs barked, teens rode by on bikes, a woman jogged with headphones in. I whispered, "Where are you, baby?" And the wind ain't. Something had to change. Either I was going to sink into this pain until there was nothing left of me, or I was going to have to find a way to live again, even if I didn't know how. But before that could happen, something found me. Something that changed everything. A new clue. A new mystery. A new reason to believe. But before that, I was broken. Not the kind of broken that needs fixing, the kind that needs understanding. Because you can't begin to rebuild a life until you've truly accepted the pieces that were shattered. And I was buried in those pieces, alone, waiting. It had been 19 years, 19 birthdays, 19 candles I never got to light, 19 unanswered questions. By then I had stopped looking forward to anything, even the mail. But on Taya's 34th birthday, something changed. The day started the same way it always did, with a quiet ache. I woke up before the sun, made tea I didn't drink, and sat by the window watching the world move while I stayed still. I still marked her birthday every year, not with cake, not with balloons, just with silence, a candle. Her school photo in its chipped wooden frame, and a notebook, the same one we used to pass back and forth. Every year I wrote her a new letter in it. Every year I told her what she had missed. This year I wrote, "Taya, wherever you are, I still make your favorite tea. I still leave the porch light on. I still haven't moved your books. If you come home, you'll know where everything is." I closed the notebook, pressed it to my chest, and cried like I hadn't in months. Later that afternoon, I drove to the cemetery, not because she was buried there, but because it was quiet. There's a bench near the back under a tree that blooms pink in spring. I sat there and whispered all the things I never got to say. And then I went home. That night, sometime past midnight, I got up to get a glass of water. I walked into the kitchen and stopped. My back door was unlocked. That's what made me pause. I never left it open, especially not at night. I stood there for a second, heart thudding, staring at the handle. Did I forget? Was it old age? Exhaustion? I stepped forward, slowly, pulled it shut, and twisted the lock. Then I turned around and saw it. Something was on my hallway table. Something that hadn't been there when I went to bed. A small plastic rectangle. I knew it before I touched it. It was her school ID. Taya's, the one she had on her when she disappeared. I hadn't seen it in 19 years. The police had told me it wasn't found in her locker, her backpack, or the dumpster. It had simply vanished with her. But now it was here, right in my house. I picked it up, placed it in my home, and then maybe I was in shock. Maybe I was desperate. But I brought it to my nose. It smelled faintly of lavender, her favorite scent. A scent I hadn't smelled in this house in over a decade. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a prank. This was intentional. I checked the windows. All were locked, except the one in the living room, slightly ajar. I checked the door. Nothing forced. No footprints, no signs of a break-in, but I knew my routine. I checked the locks every night. There was no way I had left it open. Someone had been here. Someone had walked into my home, placed that ID on the table, and left quietly. Not to hurt me, not to steal, but to leave a message, a clue, a breadcrumb. I sat down at the table with the ID and stared at it for hours. I didn't sleep. I didn't call the police. I didn't know what to say. What would I tell them? That my missing daughter's ID magically showed up with a future expiry date? They would label me delusional, or worse, attention-seeking. But I wasn't crazy. This was real. And it meant one terrifying, thrilling thing. She was alive. Or someone wanted me to think she was. And either way, I had to follow that trail. I opened my locked box, the one with the case files, the missing persons flyers, the old notebooks, everything I had kept in secret even after the world stopped caring. I laid it all out on the living room floor like a puzzle. I went back to every article, every blurry security cam photo, every tip that never led anywhere. I stayed up until dawn, cross-referencing the year 2025. Why would that date matter? And then, something clicked. One of the reports from a few years ago about a women's rehab center upstate mentioned a patient who called herself T. She had no ID. She stayed only 3 days. The report had said she wore an old-school sweatshirt and never spoke unless spoken to. I had dismissed it back then, but now I couldn't ignore it. Was she moving through places under the radar, living as someone else? I began reaching out, carefully, quietly, no social media, just phone calls, private investigators, women's shelters, bookstores, because if this ID was a message, that meant someone was watching me, maybe even she was. And if she had finally left a sign after 19 years, it meant she was ready to be found. I didn't know where it would lead. I didn't know if I could handle the truth. But I knew one thing with every piece of my cracked heart. Tia was trying to come home. Grief can become a second skin if you wear it long enough. For 19 years, I'd wrapped myself in sorrow so tightly I forgot what it felt like to had a question to chase. And the moment I leaned into that question, everything began to stir. I started small. First, I cleared the dining table. the same one that had collected dust and unopened mail for years. I laid out everything I had on Teos' case. The police reports, the news clippings, the old-school rosters, the timelines I had drawn by hand over the years. I turned it into a working space. The living room became my war room. Then I began rereading her notebooks, all the ones Shed left behind. I had once tucked them away because they hurt too much to see. But now, every sentence, every word felt like a thread I needed to follow. One entry caught my attention. Some places don't feel real, like they exist just between awake and asleep. Like when you know something is wrong, but you smile anyway. It didn't mean anything by itself, but it was a pattern, something I kept finding in her words. A duality, a split self, someone who felt stuck between being present and disappearing. I highlighted those moments. I began mapping them. Patterns emerged. I found names she mentioned repeatedly: Mr. Dale, the van guy, Kate. I had dismissed them years ago, assuming they were characters from short stories or inside jokes from school, but what if they weren't? I wrote them on note cards, pinned them to the wall. I made a list of shelters, drop-in centers, and clinics where women could show up without ID. Then I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I called a private investigator. Her name was Dina Voss, recommended by someone I met through a missing persons forum. Dina was direct. Former FBI, no sugarcoating. She had lines under her eyes and a voice like gravel. When I told her my story, she didn't dismiss me. She just said, "You waited 19 years. Let's not waste another week." For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone. Dina began digging quietly. She had access to things I didn't: financial records, address histories, witness statements. We worked in silence, exchanging emails, late-night phone calls, encrypted messages. While she worked her end, I started taking care of myself again. Not in a dramatic way. I just took showers every morning. I cooked real food. I lit candles again. I opened windows. I began walking around the block in the evenings, letting the air touch my skin. I began talking to Taya again, out loud. At first, just a few words. "Where are you? Are you watching? I'm trying." Then, whole conversations. I'd sit on the porch and imagine her sitting beside me. I'd tell her about my dreams, about how mad I was, about how sorry I was, about how I never gave up. Not really. I just ran out of strength for a while. And in those quiet porch moments, I began to feel something come back. Not answers, not certainty, but a sense of self. I wasn't just a woman who lost her daughter. I was still her mother. She vanished. She was sitting under the maple tree in our backyard, legs crossed, writing in her notebook. Her hair was loose for once, blowing across her face. She was smiling. Not for the camera. Just smiling. I stared at it for hours. That smile reminded me that she wasn't just a victim. She was a person, a soul, a full life. One that didn't end the day she disappeared. And if there was even a chance that she had found a way to survive, to rebuild herself in the cracks, then I had to do the same. For her and for me. One night, Dina called. Her voice was low and steady. I pulled something interesting. She had found an apartment lease in Eugene, Oregon under the name T. Lind, paid in cash, short-term, no forwarding address. But what caught her attention was the emergency contact form filled out at the local clinic. It listed a phone number that pinged in Boise just 4 days ago, a few blocks from my house. "Whoever this is," Dina said, "they're close, and they're watching you." I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry either. I just stood at the window looking out into the dark street and whispered, "I know you're out there. I'm not angry. Just come home. Or let me come find you." It wasn't a plea. It was a promise. Because I wasn't the woman I had been a month ago, hollow and waiting. I was moving again, and even if the path ahead was murky and terrifying, I would walk it, step by quiet step. because something had awakened in me that grief had long buried, the fire, and I wasn't going to let it die again. Change didn't arrive like thunder. It came like a steady breath after years of choking. After the ID appeared and Dina traced that number to somewhere near my home, I knew I had to stop grieving in the open, not because I was done, but because I needed privacy to move. Grief had made me loud in my loneliness, but now silence was my strength. I didn't tell neighbors, I didn't post in missing persons forums anymore. I stopped answering questions from the few people who still checked in every year around her birthday. I simply began preparing. First, I made a list, not of what I had lost, but of what I still had. Names, memories, places, dates, connections that hadn't made sense before but now shimmered with possibility. I reread every letter Tia had ever written me, not just the words, but her phrasing, her pauses, what she wasn't saying between the lines. Then I reorganized the house, not in a frantic, grief-driven way like I had in the past, but intentionally. I cleared her bedroom, not to erase her, but to make space in case she came back. I washed her bed sheets, replaced the light bulb in the ceiling fan, left a sweater of mine folded at the end of her bed. One night I even placed the school ID back on her pillow like she had done for me. A message returned. I didn't know if she would ever see it, but I wanted her to know this door was still hers. Instances where a T-lined or T-lidden had appeared in rental records, shelter sign-in logs, or health clinic forms. Always cash, always temporary, never longer than 2 weeks in one place. The last one had been a women's shelter near Yakima, Washington, just 4 months before the ID showed up. Every staff member described her the same way. Quiet, thin, smart eyes, wore long sleeves even in heat, polite, distracted. One of them remembered her always reading. Dog-eared paperbacks. Another remembered she had a scar on her cheek, left side, same side as Taya. The problem was, by the time we tracked her movements, she was already gone again, always just one step ahead, or maybe one step behind. Watching, waiting. I began to wonder if she was doing this on purpose, not hiding out of fear, but testing me, seeing if I'd stop looking again. So I made sure I didn't. I canceled my television subscription. I stopped reading the news. Every spare hour I poured into this new search. I kept a notebook, not just for clues, but for my thoughts, my reactions, my doubts. I started writing to her again, not like a grieving mother, but like a woman rebuilding a bridge. I think you left the ID on my table, thank you. I saw your face. I saw your strength. You're still you. Are you safe? Do you need me to come to you? Or are you waiting until you're ready? I'm not angry. I'm proud. You survived something I don't yet understand. But I'm listening now, really listening. There were days when nothing happened, days when I questioned everything. Was I chasing ghosts? Was this someone's cruel trick? Had I finally crossed from determined to delusional? But then I'd feel it again, that tug. That soft, quiet knowing that she was out there, that she was trying, in her own way, to reconnect, to test the water, to rebuild a shattered line of trust. So I prepared for her, not just practically, emotionally. I started therapy again, quietly, privately. The sessions weren't about closure anymore. They were about readiness. Because what if she did come back? What would I say? What would I ask? What would I need to hear? And more importantly, what would I need to let go? You don't just pick up where you left off after 19 years. You have to build something new from what's left. And that takes patience, grace, strength. I started journaling what I would do if I saw her again. I practiced the words in the mirror. Not, where have you been, but I'm here. Not, why didn't you call, but you're not alone anymore. That's what the silent setup was really about. Not revenge, not a dramatic rescue, but a readiness to meet her wherever she was, physically and emotionally. Dina found one more thing, a transaction. A withdrawal from an ATM in Idaho Falls. A small one, $40. The surveillance camera had long been wiped, but the card used was a reloadable debit card, bought in cash, registered under the name, was a piece of paper, no envelope, no signature, just 3 words written in small, delicate handwriting. I never left. I stood there, barefoot, heart pounding, the sun rising behind me. The paper fluttered slightly in the wind, but the message didn't change. I looked down the street, empty. No footsteps, no shadows, just the quiet breath of morning and a mother standing on the edge of something she couldn't name. I didn't run inside. I didn't call anyone. I just stood there and whispered, I know, and I'm still here. I didn't feel powerful when I first held that note in my hand. I never left. 3 simple words, but they rang louder than anything I'd heard in years. I folded the paper gently, slipped it into my pocket, and went about the day as if nothing had happened. But everything had. Something in me had changed. I stopped pacing. I stopped guessing. I started knowing. She was here, maybe not physically every moment, but close enough to see me, to watch the porch, to place a message beneath the mat like a secret handshake. It wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. And that changed everything. From that moment on, I carried myself differently. Not like a mother in mourning, but like someone in motion. I began to speak with intention, even if I was alone. I knew she might be listening or watching. In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch with 2 mugs of tea, one for me, one for her, and talk into the quiet. I saw the lilacs starting to bloom. I said one night, you used to steal one every spring and put it in your sock drawer. No tears, no pleading, just memory, spoken like a thread. Some nights I'd read aloud from the books she once loved. Others I'd hum her favorite songs while sweeping the porch, like I was sweeping the past out of the way. And she responded, not with phone calls or emails, but in gestures. Once I found a silver ring on the fence post, small, delicate, with a tiny moonstone. It had belonged to my mother, passed down to Taya on her 13th birthday. I thought it had been lost with her, but there it was, catching the morning sun like a whisper. Another time, I came home from the store to find a library card tucked inside the mailbox, bent, faded, but with her name on it. She was leaving clues, not for the police, not for the world, just for me. And I understood what she was doing. She wasn't ready to return, but she was reclaiming her story on her terms. That's when the power began to shift, not in a loud way, not with headlines or confrontation, but in the quiet exchange of trust. Taya was no longer someone lost. She was someone in control. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I saw the people who had failed her, the system, the school, the police, begin to lose their grip on the version of her they had frozen in time. She wasn't just a face on a missing persons poster anymore. She was moving, watching, choosing, and I moved with her. Dina noticed it too. The silence isn't empty, she told me. It's strategic. We kept tracking the debit card activity and a pattern emerged. Low. Withdrawals always at night, never from the same place twice. Taya was staying off the grid, but not hiding. It was like she wanted us to see enough to follow, but not enough to catch up. That's when we found the first mistake, from the man we suspected all along. Remember Dale Irwin? The man in the dark car I once followed. The man who ran the fake mentorship program for troubled teens. The man who disappeared a year after Taya did, just as quietly. Well, his alias popped up again. Dina found a permit application submitted under the name Daniel Arlo for a property renovation in Washington State. Same birthday, different ID, but the signature matched Dale's from old employment records. It was a small thing, a sloppy oversight from someone who had spent years operating in shadows. But it was enough. We passed the evidence along to a contact Dina had in the Attorney General's office. Quietly, no press, no noise. I didn't want justice from the system. I wanted the balance to shift in Taya's favor, and it was happening. He didn't know she was watching. He didn't know I was watching. He had assumed, like so many predators do, that time meant safety. But Taya had grown up. She had learned to survive, and now she was circling back, not to beg for justice, but to own her story. That realization hit me one night as I was folding laundry, a task I used to do while she read me her poems. I held one of her old t-shirts to my face and whispered, "You're winning." Because she was. For years I had thought strength looked like rescue, but now I knew. Sometimes strength is endurance. The power was no longer in the hands of those who had taken her voice. It was in hers, in the way she left messages, in the way she revealed just enough to show me she was still building a life, even if it looked nothing like the one I had imagined for her. And I became something else too. Not a grieving mother, but a witness to her survival, her defiance, her quiet revolution, and I stood taller because of it. Because the world thought she was gone. But she was rewriting the story, one small act at a time, and every quiet choice she made, every risk she took, every breadcrumb she left for me, was proof that even the most broken stories can still be reclaimed. It was raining the night I saw her again, not the kind of rain that makes noise, the kind that falls gently, like it knows what it's washing away. Dina had called earlier that day. She said she picked up a new tip from a shelter worker in Vancouver, Washington. A mural had gone up on the side of their building, painted by a young woman who signed her art with only one name, Taya. The staff hadn't asked questions. Many of the women who passed through that shelter came and went without names or histories. But this one, she had shown up, painted a storm on the wall, and left quietly the next morning. No forwarding address, no number, but she had left a single phrase beneath the image. I remember. I didn't hesitate. 7 hours. But I didn't feel restless. I sat still, hands folded over my coat. I watched the scenery pass like chapters I no longer belonged to. The shelter was on a side street, small, clean, safe. The mural faced the alley. I turned the corner, heart pounding, and there it was. A wave rising over a city skyline. But instead of crushing it, the wave held the buildings up, cradled them, and on the far side of the wave, a girl, tiny, faceless, but strong, standing with one arm raised like she had commanded the tide. I didn't need to read the signature. I knew. This was her. This was Taya. I stood there for what felt like an hour, soaked from the drizzle, staring at the wall like it might open and tell me everything. And then a voice behind me, soft, familiar. You came. I turned. She stood about 20 feet away, just beyond the alley's edge, hoodie up, hands in her pockets, thin frame, wide eyes. Older, yes, but unmistakably her. The curve of her mouth, the slope of her nose, the small scar still faint on her left cheek, the one from when she fell off her bike at 9. I couldn't breathe. I didn't run to her. I didn't cry. I just looked, because I knew, in my bones, this moment wasn't about me. It was about her. So I said only one word, hi. She blinked, swallowed, nodded, hi. We stood in silence for a beat. The rain whispered between us. I didn't think you'd come, she said. I didn't think you'd ask me to, I replied. She looked down at her shoes, then back up. Her voice didn't shake, but I saw the effort it took to keep it even. I didn't know how to come back. I didn't know if I could. You don't have to, I said. Not the way it was. That's gone. We both know that. She nodded again. I left because I had to, but I stayed away because I didn't want to break you more than I already had. You didn't break me, I whispered. No, she said quietly, but you were already breaking, and I didn't know how to save you. I couldn't even save myself. I stepped one pace closer, slowly, gently. You don't owe me an explanation, but I want you to know I never stopped being your mother, not for one day. She smiled. Not fully, but enough. I know, she said. That's why I left the ID. I needed to know if you still wanted me. My chest cracked open. I never stopped. Taya finally stepped forward, just one step, close enough that I could see the faint lines under her eyes, the healed scar on her wrist, the old bruises time had worn away, but hadn't quite erased. I'm not the same person, she said. I'm not either, I answered. We didn't hug, not yet. She needed more time. But we stood together under the dripping sky, side by side, watching the mural like it belonged to both of us. Did you paint this for me? I asked softly. She shrugged. I don't know. Maybe I painted it for who I used to be, maybe for who I thought you were. And now, she looked at me, her gaze steady. Now I paint because I can, not because I have to remember. letting the moment hold us, letting it settle. She didn't tell me where she had been. I didn't ask. That would come later, or not at all. But she was here, and that was enough. Before she left, she handed me a folded piece of paper. I didn't read it until I was back on the bus. It said, "I don't know where I'm going yet, but I wanted you to see me again. Not as a missing person, but as someone who made it. You don't need to find me anymore. Just believe I exist, and I'll find you when I'm ready. Signed, TL." And beneath that, PS, you can keep the ID. I didn't hear from Taya again for another 4 weeks. No notes, no signs, no library cards in the mailbox, no rings on the fence post. At first, the silence hollowed me out again, but this time it didn't break me, because I understood her disappearance the first time had been forced, stolen, by fear, manipulation, and shame. But this silence, this one belonged to her. It was choice, and when someone's been denied that for so long, you don't chase them. You wait. Then one morning, an envelope arrived. No return address, just my name, written in tight, careful handwriting. Inside was a flash drive, a folded court document, and a handwritten note. It said, "Don't speak my name, just know it's done." I plugged the flash drive into my old laptop, heart thudding so loudly I could barely hear myself think. There were 4 files. The first was a scanned copy of Dale Irwin's driver's license under his new name, Daniel Arlo. The second was a video, grainy, shaky, looked like it had been taken from a hidden camera. Dale, older, heavier, wearing a ball cap, sitting at a diner booth talking to a young girl who looked no older than 16. His tone was calm, friendly, but his words, "Nobody knows where you are. That's the good part. You start fresh with me. You don't even have to tell them your real name." I paused the video, covered my mouth. The third file was a series of emails between Daniel Arlo and someone labeled Buyer Inquiry, discussing placement opportunities for ATR risk minors. The language was coded, chilling. One phrase burned into my memory. "They don't have paperwork, they're ghosts, which makes them perfect." The fourth and final file was an audio recording. A woman's voice, strong, controlled. "Taya," she said. "I was 15 when Dale Irwin told me I was invisible. He made me believe I had no future, no voice. But he was wrong. I'm not invisible, and this is me saying finally in my own words, I never left. I've just been watching." The court document was a copy of a sealed indictment. Dale Irwin, a.k.a. Daniel Arlo, arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit human trafficking, document fraud, unlawful confinement, and assault of a minor, filed 2 days before I received the package. The arrest had been quiet, no headlines, no news crews. Taya made sure of that. She didn't want fame. She didn't want her face on talk shows or news tickers. She wanted justice, not attention, and she got it. Her way. Dina can long time. I sat in my living room and stared at the court papers in my lap. 19 years. 19 years of silence, darkness, and unanswered questions. And now here it was. Not just closure, consequence. And the most poetic part? Taya had never said a word to law enforcement. She had built this case from the shadows, gathered the evidence, captured the video, tracked the movements, submitted it all anonymously through encrypted channels through a nonprofit that protects survivor identities. She had brought him down without ever having to stand in front of a courtroom or relive the worst parts of her life on a witness stand. She had orchestrated her justice without ever stepping into the spotlight. That's what made it beautiful and haunting, and hers. That night, I lit a candle and placed the flash drive beside it. I whispered her name once into the quiet, and I cried. Not from pain, not from grief, from awe. Because my daughter had once been taken from this world by a man who thought he could erase her. And now, almost 2 decades later, she had quietly erased him. He would sit behind bars unknown by most but seen by her, named by her, brought down by her strength, her patience, and her silence. I wanted to scream it from the rooftops, but I didn't, because the most powerful justice isn't loud. It's complete. It's when the world assumes you're broken and instead you become the storm they never saw coming. Taya didn't return to my doorstep after that, but I didn't expect her to. She had given me what I never thought I'd have, the truth and a kind of peace that doesn't need explaining. I don't know where she is now. I don't know if I'll ever see her again, but I know she's free, and she did it her way, without my protection, without my help, without the world's permission, and that was the final twist. Not that she was alive, not that she took him down, but that after everything he stole from her, she reclaimed her life without asking anyone for it back. It was early autumn when the second letter arrived. No envelope this time, just a folded page inside the same old notebook we used to write in, the one I'd left on the porch table months ago, the same one Taya and I used to pass back and forth during the years when words were easier to write than say. I hadn't noticed it at first. It was wedged under the notebook cover like someone had opened it, slipped the page in, and closed it back gently, like she didn't want to disturb anything, like she wanted it to wait for me. I stood there on the porch in my slippers, morning tea still in hand, staring at the notebook like it was breathing. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. There were only a few lines written in her precise, slanted handwriting. "Can I visit for one night? I won't stay. I just want to sit where I used to. No questions, no pressure, just peace." No signature, no time or date, just that single request. I didn't hesitate. I left the porch light on every night for the next week. I restocked snacks. I cleaned the guest bedroom. Even though I knew she wouldn't sleep there, I left the living room, just as she remembered it. Worn rug, mismatched pillows, the same old bookshelf she used to organize alphabetically as a child. I didn't know what day she would come. I didn't know if she'd knock. But 4 nights later, at just past 1000 p.m., I heard the soft creak of the front gate. My chest tightened, but I stayed seated in my rocking chair just like I'd promised. She appeared quietly on the porch steps, hoodie up, hands in her jacket pockets, same sharp eyes beneath longer, darker hair. She looked like a woman now, not a girl, but still my child. She didn't speak, just nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement of acceptance, and then stepped inside. I moved slowly, gave her space. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. She looked around the living room like someone walking through a photograph, touching the edge of the armchair she used to curl up in, brushing her fingers across the rim of the record player. Finally, she sat on the floor beside the couch, cross-legged, back straight, the same way she used to sit when she'd sketch for hours while I read. I didn't rush her. I just made tea, 2 mugs, the same ones we used to use. Hers was chipped on the handle, a piece of familiarity I had never thrown away. When I handed it to her, she smiled softly. "Still the same mug, still the same mother," I said. She nodded, and for a while that was enough. We didn't talk about where she'd been. We didn't ask about years lost or pain endured. We sat in silence, safe, real, the kind of silence that says, "I see you, I'm still here, you don't owe me anything." At one point she stood and walked to the bookshelf, pulled down an old poetry book, sat back down, and opened it to a dog-eared page. She read one line aloud. "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." She closed the book, rested it in her lap, and I saw her, not as the teenager I lost, not as the broken girl I imagined all these years, but as the woman she had become, whole, quiet, watchful, and strong. At midnight she rose to her feet. "I won't stay," she said, just like her letter promised. "I know," I said. She looked at me, eyes shining. "You don't need me to, do you?" I shook my head. "No, baby. I just need to know that you're okay. I'm learning," she said. "Still figuring things out. That's more than enough." She walked to the door, paused, turned. "Can I come back again sometime?" My voice caught in my throat. I nodded. "Any time, no pressure, just peace." She smiled, and for the first time it wasn't guarded. She stepped off the porch and into the dark, and I didn't follow. Because this time, her leaving wasn't an escape. It was a choice, and that made all the difference.
Had written.
Not everything was stolen. Some of it I carried with me. I sat on the couch and let the tears come, not from pain, not from grief, but from the soft, overwhelming relief of being remembered, of knowing that even in the darkest, most distant places, a thread had still connected us, and that thread had held. Some stories don't end with explanations. They end with stillness, with a window cracked open, and a breeze that smells faintly of lavender, with a kitchen where 2 mugs sit drying beside the sink, with a light left on, not because someone is lost, but because someone might come home when she's ready. It's been 3 months since Taya came to visit. She hasn't returned since, and she hasn't written. But I haven't stopped waiting. Not in desperation, not anymore, just in love. Every morning I light a candle on the windowsill. I boil water for 2 mugs even if I only drink from one. I still write in the notebook we shared, even if I'm the only one who sees the words. Because now I understand, not all reconnections look like reunions. Some look like allowing the other person to grow, to move, to change without needing to be pulled back into who they were. Taya isn't the girl I lost. She's the woman she became in the aftermath. She's not the teenager on the missing posters anymore. She's not a ghost or a secret or a wound. She's alive. That's more than I had for 19 years. And it's enough. The porch light still burns every night, not because I expect her to show up, but because it's my way of saying, you have a place here if you ever want it. There are things I will never know. Where she went in the early years, who helped her survive, what horrors she endured. I no longer ask those questions because what matters more now is the person she chose to be despite it all. A woman who paints murals on shelter walls, a woman who builds cases in silence, a woman who came back, not to explain, but to be seen. And I saw her. That was all she ever needed. One day last week, I found something in the mailbox. A sketch, charcoal on parchment, simple, soft strokes. It was a bench beneath a blooming tree, just like the one we used to sit under at the cemetery each year on her birthday. Except in this version, there were 2 figures sitting side by side, one tall, one smaller, heads turned toward each other. No faces, just the shape of comfort. On the back it said, "Still us." I framed it, hung it by the front door. It's the first thing I see when I come home. It reminds me that love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers across time, across distance, across pain, and sometimes that whisper is strong enough to carry you home. Taya didn't need to be rescued. She needed to be believed. And in the end, she rescued herself, in silence, in shadows, in strength. And me. I learned that being a mother isn't about without demanding anyone return. I used to think closure meant answers. But now I know. Closure is just peace, quietly arriving in a place you thought would never heal. This wasn't just a story about a missing girl. It was about a mother who waited without knowing, a daughter who survived without being seen, and the quiet power of choosing connection over explanation. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like. Share your thoughts in the comments, especially if you've ever waited for someone you loved in silence or in strength. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real, powerful stories like this one, because somewhere out there, someone is still listening for a voice they haven't heard in years. And one story, one light left on, could change everything.